begin. Hi, this is Ronika Wahi. In the last interview that I conducted, I spoke to Carola Schmidt from Brazil, who is a pediatric oncology pharmacist and a writer writing on cancer. So, during the interview, she spoke about a number of people who had bravely fought cancer, and they are now actually helping out other people. So she spoke of women whom she's worked with, and now they are helping kids deal with cancer, right? So today we have Aime Card, who is a breast cancer survivor, and she has also taken this step to share her story through a memoir, so that other people can um, learn from her experiences and learn about how she bravely fought against and defeated cancer. So thank you so much, Aime, for taking out the time to speak to me today. It's great to have you here. Um, okay, so I'll just briefly tell you about Amy's profile. I'll add the link to her site, and you can check out about her works and her blogs. But briefly, she works as an editor, and she's also a writer. And her works are have been received quite well. She's written books. She's also written blogs. One of her blogs is, again, that same sentiment of sharing experiences to help out people. It's for new families who are settling in Silicon Valley. So it's if you are one of those, you can check out a blog for some useful tips. So Aime, in her memoir entitled "And Beneath It All Was Love," she speaks about her journey of defeating cancer. And she starts from the point when she was first diagnosed with it, which was barely a year after her mother lost the battle of life to brain cancer. And Aime talks about how she dealt with this bravely, what are the steps she took, and what her thoughts were, how she managed to deal with every phase, right? So let's start, Aime, with this, that you tell us briefly about what was your whole experience of undergoing treatment for this, and very importantly, how your family and friends supported you throughout the love that they gave you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and talking about this really important topic. That's one of the drivers in writing the book, is so hopefully I could share the experience with other people, because so many people have issues with cancer, and most people have someone that they love who've experienced something like this. So the whole process for me lasted about a year. The process of the acute treatment. I went through 3 surgeries, 20 weeks of chemotherapy, and 6 weeks of radiation. And then after that, most people have to have, like, for several years, tamoxifen, which is just an extra. It's a kind of a chemotherapy, but it's most people can tolerate it really well. So I went through kind of 3 stages with that. So the first stage was the very fearful. When you first get the diagnosis, that's what nobody wants to hear, that news that you have cancer. And so for me, that stage was just getting used to this new news and doing all the research that I needed to do to see what this journey was going to be like. And then that kind of carried on through the surgery, when you find out exactly what's going to be happening. Some people don't have to do chemotherapy. And if you don't have to do chemotherapy, it's wonderful, because chemotherapy is actually probably the most grueling stage of it. So that brings me to the second stages of the whole chemotherapy process. So that process lasted 20 weeks. It's a kind of a standard regimen for when people have a more aggressive cancer, but it's really brutal. So that was, I would say, the most physically challenging. And that's when I really did need to, it wasn't just something I could internalize and deal with on my own. I had to have help from other people to get through that stage. And then, once that was over, I get to the healing stage where it's just kind of like starting to feel like myself again and then walking through. And then, I mean, how you mentioned how important friendships were and family. I know for me, it would have been really easy to give up without the people that I had that I loved around me. Um, with my husband and my children, my husband took care of so many things that I couldn't do at the time. But my children really gave me the motivation to keep going, through those times that were very dark. I just knew that I had to push through it for them. For them, they still had birthdays and they still had, losing teeth and moments that were really special. And I'd say that was part of the heartbreaking part too, is missing some of those little moments and seeing their lives kind of go on around me. But they really helped pull me through. And then also my friends. I was in a situation where I just moved out to Silicon Valley, and so I didn't have a huge network, but the people that I had met and the people through my children's school really surrounded me in such a kind way to be able to somebody that you haven't known all your life, you don't have any obligations to, but you just see somebody struggling and you step up, and that makes all the difference. So that really does, people around you and the love that kind of gets you through that's essential. I think without that, it would have been a really different story.
Right. Yeah, I think it's wonderful, the way you were supported by a lot of people. How you shared that feeling of vulnerability, particularly because you just lost your mother to the same disease. And so, having and then your family was so far away. So having those people, and like you said, they had no obligation to do it, right? So it's wonderful how they came to, despite not being your family, or despite their friendships not being like, they weren't friendships which had extended for years, right? But still, it was like really wonderful reading about it, and now you're sharing it, of course. So it's, I think it's very heartwarming that people support in such a way. Um, I wanted to share a bit more about the disease, so as to like generate awareness about this. Now, you were diagnosed with invasive ductal carcinoma, right? Which is the most common type of breast cancer. So, what was it that made you first go in for a mammography? I mean, why did you decide to go in for that first? And then, because you've been through this journey of learning about the whole thing, you did your own research, not just relying on what the doctors told you, but you just tried to look up everything and understand everything on your own. So, what are some of the important things that you learned about this cancer? And also, one other thing I'd like you to talk about is that um, yours is not an age to have, got this. Um, anybody can get cancer, but like, but still, you're. I mean, you're quite young, and still you had breast cancer, and you had to go in for such an intensive treatment. So, if you could share a bit about what are what is it about the age factor when we talk specifically about breast cancer? What role does age play in getting it, or in treatment?
Mhm. So, first, the reason why I went in for my screening, that was just, I had turned 40, and that was just my first screening. That was just because I knew that I needed to it was recommended to have a screening when you were 40. I'd actually turned 41 because after my mom died right when I was 40. And so it took me just a little while to get back to those things like taking care of yourself and all. So as soon as I kind of got my head on straight, I was like, okay, time to schedule my first mammogram. And that was it. So I feel really strongly about sometimes the recommendation is 40 and sometimes the recommendation is 45. And I would say get it as early as you can. It doesn't hurt to, I mean, well, it might hurt, but it's not gonna cause any harm to you to be checked. And it's just better to stay on top of your healthcare. So I got that first mammogram, and that's when I got the news. I was a little bit aware because we had some family history of breast cancer, but that was all postmenopausal. And so mine was premenopausal, and that was, new. I wasn't expecting that. So that kind of goes to the age factor. I think it's more rare, like you mentioned, the for it to be in younger women. But what I've heard and what I've learned, I'm not a doctor, so I don't have all of the statistics to back me up. But anecdotally, what I've heard is that when the younger people get it, it can be more aggressive. So it's even more important for us to, go to our screenings and do self-exams and just know what's going on. But in my case, I did not feel a lump. It was just a screening from the mammography. So I did, like you mentioned, I had the most common type. I also had, they test the tumor for different receptors, and I had 2 receptors that were HR positive and ER positive. And that means that the cancer is receptive to hormones, which actually makes the treatment work better for some reason. So I know people really struggle when those are negative, because they have to have different treatment options. But luckily for me, that the treatment did tend to work for this particular kind. The downside was that it was a very aggressive form. So that's why they had to go, full tilt on all the treatment. So I had to do the most aggressive treatment, which I think they often err on the side of caution when people are young too, because they just know that the chances of recurrence, because you just have more years ahead of you, and the tendency for it to be aggressive, they just don't take any chances. So I think that the lesson in that is just do your screenings as soon as you can. So.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing such useful bits of information. Uh, okay, so you also mentioned in your memoir that you looked up stuff to see what is the right kind of diet, right? So you worked to alter your diet. So if you could just share what are some kinds of foods which are recommended once you get cancer, or and which are the foods which are to be avoided.
So it's no real mystery, and what the things that you find out are kind of things that you kind of knew but ignored when you were younger, maybe, to avoid lots of sugar and fried foods and too much dairy, or but also to make sure that you're getting lots of vegetables and good lean protein. And those are the kinds of things that everybody's looking for some fun way to get around those issues. And no, you just need to eat more fruits and vegetables and less junk food. But I really did just try to get back to the basics with our eating, try to the thing that I really did change was to try to make everything more clean, as clean as possible. Where try to find as many organics as I could, and the kinds of foods that were best to be organic, the kind like potatoes and things that come from the earth, they really need to be organic. And also my beauty products, cosmetics, I really needed to make sure those were clean, because you realize how much you put onto your skin, and your skin absorbs a lot of the chemicals. And so I just went back to really clean, making sure everything that I put in or on my body was as clean as possible. Trying to avoid, a lot of plastics, because you can ingest little bits of plastic, things like that. But I do have to say that I tried to not go too crazy, because the more you learn about how much is in your environment that can be toxic to you, it almost causes stress that's also toxic to you. So I think you have to take a kind of a measured approach. Just do the best that you can. I think a lot of nutritionists will say, try to be 80% good. You can't be perfect. That will drive you crazy to try to be perfect. But just, try to be 80% good. So that's kind of a philosophy that once I cleaned up as a family, our act, and just make sure we were being as good as we can. There's also, this is a little funny story that I shared in the book, that where sugar is bad for you. Everybody knows that too much sugar is bad for you. And I was really worried. They were taking all of my levels of different, chemicals in my body, my white blood cell count and everything. They were doing that on a weekly basis. And one week during my chemotherapy, it was my daughter's birthday. And so we got special permission to take a little trip. And so we took the trip. My husband had to learn how to give me a shot. And I did, we went through all the hoops to be able to take this trip. And, there was one night where we were in the hotel room, and the hotel gives out little cookies. And so we were asking for little cookies at the hotel just to have a little treat. And they said, well, we can send you brownies brownies and ice cream. And we were thinking, oh, this is a little bit naughty, but okay, well, let's have some brownies and ice cream. And it just turned into like this little party. It was just this fun party. And I thought, just the kids were kind of jumping around on the beds, and it was just this fun, sweet family, happy time. And then I thought, okay, so maybe I'm going to pay for that, having this trip, and maybe that would make my body tired, and maybe all the sugar from, the birthday or kind of treats. And, but then when I got back, they tested all my levels, and I had actually improved. And I thought, how is that? I thought I was, misbehaving a little bit by like not doing everything exactly by the book. And the doctor just kind of smiled at me, and she said, what your body needed was some happy time with your family. So that makes more difference, I think, than being so rigid about everything. And, you're allowed to treat yourself and have fun, in moderation. And that actually is just as good for your body, if not better, than making sure everything is done perfectly. So just a little silly story, but it always stuck with me.
No, no, I think it's quite sweet and great. Um, and I think you've made a very important point here, that although one shouldn't get like totally mad about it, but it's important to take care of one's body. We all know the stuff, right? We know too much sugar is bad, too much carbohydrates is bad. We just, I think a lot of us just do this. We download apps on our phone to keep a count over what we are eating. But I think even for younger people, I think maybe it's true, they want to eat out every day, and and it's all food that's not really good for health. We would rather not have fresh fruits and vegetables, but we want to just have snacks all the time, and then we want to have coffee all day long with sugar. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely get into some bad habits. And so just, cooking at home, it's amazing you can have as much food, and you'll feel very full and satisfied, but you actually feel better and you don't have that heavy feeling after you eat so much. So, oh, but one more tip that I did find that was really important was vitamin D, because I did find that we know a lot of in our culture, we're not outside as much as we should be, and just, with enjoying the sun and being outside. And so I was low in vitamin D. And so now I make sure to make sure I'm always taking vitamin D and getting outside when I can. Just being outside in nature is really good for you too. So.
I think this particular deficiency of vitamin D, I think, is increasing quite a lot these days. I mean, uh, I think even for young people who do go out, a lot of people have this deficiency.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know. At least I'm talking about people I know. Myself, my cousins, my friends. People in their 20s and early 30s, a lot of them have this deficiency, and
Mhm.
we know it can be like really really dangerous, the
Mhm.
deficiency of this particular vitamin. But I don't know, it's like we all know, what's good for us, but until something untoward happens, we're not really keen on taking the right steps. So
Mhm. It's
I
true.
think
It's
it's
true.
so I think it's just, you know maybe good to learn from other people's experiences. It's easier said than done, of course. But
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Yeah, let me share my experience so you don't have to. I'll take the hit so that you don't have to do that, because, take your vitamin D. It only helps. It makes you feel better too when you
yeah,
have enough.
right. And okay, so continuing to talk about your book, um, I remember there was this one scene that you shared, right? Just a few days after you were diagnosed with breast cancer. The scene in the bath that you talk about, right, where you were feeling very very vulnerable, and you were sad and angry and panicky, right? So, and of course that same feeling of being panicked and being sad and being scared, that obviously kept cropping up, right? So how did you finally decide to actually write down the story, because you're showing your vulnerable side to people. So how difficult was it for you to actually take this decision and start writing everything the way it was, the kind of thoughts you had, how weak you felt at certain moments? How did you make this decision to show your vulnerability? Was it easy? Was it difficult?
So, for me, writing is actually a cathartic process. So I journaled ever since I was little. I would, whenever I would be feeling something that was kind of too big for me, I would just write kind of furiously and write it down. And so when this started, I would keep little notes in my phone, all just kind of things that I was thinking and experiences that I was having. I would write these little, a few paragraphs, because writing has just always been that kind of comforting place for me. A lot of times I would find through my life that when there was a problem that was too big for me, sometimes if I wrote it down, then I would figure it out, because I would kind of pull it out of my head and look at it in a different way. And then I could kind of help to solve the problem. So writing has always kind of been a thing like that for me. And so it was kind of natural for me to use that tool to kind of get through this process. And then once it was actually one of my friends who I was, sharing a couple of things with, that, oh, well, we were talking, and I would say, oh, I was writing about that last night, or, so then we started talking, and she's like, this needs to be a book. You need to put this in a book. And I thought, it actually kind of makes sense. And then once I started thinking about it in that way, it just kind of went together. It just kind of, you know, meshed, and everything kind of, it made sense for me to kind of, for my healing process, to have everything written down and kind of writing in the moment. And then it also has the benefit of hopefully being able to help someone else. So it's kind of a win-win for everyone, I think. And I also, because I don't love talking about, you know, when you mentioned that vulnerability, I don't love talking about things that make me vulnerable, but I'm happy to share with someone if it's going to be helpful to them. So if I can share by writing, it's just a lot easier for me. So I can say to my friends that when they asked me, how are you doing? And I would always say I was fine, even if I wasn't fine. But now when they say, you know, what it was it like, your experience, I can just say, here, I can give you the book and say, just, this is everything you need to know, and then I won't have to talk about it anymore. But so that was the another kind of benefit, is that I have a record now of this experience that I went through. And one of the side effects of all the chemotherapy and medication that I was on is that you lose some of your short-term memory, which is not great. I mean, that's something that happens a little bit when you get older anyway, but with all the medications, especially during that time, I was having trouble remembering lots of things. And so it kind of served as a record that I could now look back on and say, this is something that I went through, and this is something that I, you know, got through. And hopefully I can show it to my kids. My daughter now, she's 19, and she's, you know, asked if she, you know, should I read that at some point? And I think I don't want her to read it quite yet, but maybe when she's a little bit older. I don't want her to be sad, and at the right time, I think it will be good for my children to read it too. So.
Right. You said that for you, writing is a cathartic process, right? So I actually had this question in mind, whether writing this particular memoir was a cathartic process for you. And after having finished it, have you been able to process what happened better, or being more positive about it? I mean, can you like look at it in a better way, as something that you emerged victorious from, in in like a more I mean, are you more sort of okay with the thing that this actually did happen to you?
It's it's really hard in the moment to say that something like this is a gift, but when you
Right.
get to the end of it and looking back and you see how your life has changed, I do have to say that it taught me a lot about life and myself, and you know, the importance of love in everyone's lives. And so I have to say that that's the only thing that you can do when something really hard happens to you, is try to figure out what the lessons are from it and to move on. And for me, sometimes lessons like this can seem like a blessing, because you can treasure moments, you know, special little moments, like the when we were jumping on the bed and eating brownies, and you know, the just I talked about it at the end, in the end of the book, that where I had these routines in my life, you know, being at home with the kids, and you know, there's this endless stream of laundry and dishes and everybody needing to be fed all the time. And you know, after a while, when you're a young mom, it starts to wear on you, just the daily endless tasks that never are quite complete. But when that's taken away from you and you can't do those things because your body is too tired, then they turn into kind of a treasure that you are allowed, you know, there's this just gratefulness to be able to walk through the world, to see, you know, something that might not have been possible for you is now possible. Just walking with your friends, being strong enough to go on a hike, or being strong enough just to feed your family. There's a lot of, there's a lot of satisfaction in coming and just being able to care for your family and provide for them. So that definitely was an aspect that I think came from this process, and also I think could translate to other, when something else bad happens in anybody's life, I think about that this is something I know I know it's possible to get through difficult things, and I know that what you do have is so much more valuable. So it really makes you appreciate the moment. And then, so the title of the book, And Beneath It All Was Love, was really, it came from that idea of underneath, I lost my hair, and, your body changes, and when everything is really stripped away from your life, all of the things, all the constructs that you put around that, to define yourself, everything is really stripped away. The only thing that matters in the end is just the love that you have for other people and that is shared with you. That's really the only thing that matters. So that's really what I learned, and I try to remember, going forward. So.
Right. So, through this whole ordeal that you had, you actually sort of gained lessons and sort of changed your perspective, right? But have you also made certain other changes in your life, or have you made maybe changed your approach to how you do things, or do you differentiate now more between what is more valuable, what is not that valuable, or stuff like that?
Definitely the life perspective has changed. I am much more careful about what I spend my time on, and the kind of things that I want to do. The how important it is to spend time with family. I don't hesitate when I want to go spend time with my dad or my sisters in Tennessee, or our family gets together here. That was part of the reason why we moved back to the East Coast from Silicon Valley, because we realized how important it is to be around family and to not waste time on, just little things that don't matter. So there's that old saying, don't sweat the small stuff. It really does come into effect, because you think, something that would have gotten you really upset. I mean, I was talking earlier in the book about there was something that I was working on in school, and there was a lot of drama and people getting upset about some parents association fundraising kind of issues, and that kind of stuff does not matter in the end. It's nice to do and to help your school and to be involved in the community, but not to get upset over. So it did definitely change the perspective. And it's also something I need to try to remember too, because the further that I get away from the crisis, it's now been 7 years, to try to remember that too, to not fall back into old patterns of just, getting busy and I don't have time for, walking my dog because I'm too big, but take the moment to yourself, take the time with the dog and take the time with the kids, and so all of that I have to say I'm careful about remembering that, and to take the lessons that I learned so I don't have to learn them again, hopefully.
Uh, Thank you so much, Amy, for sharing about your experiences and your lessons. Of course, uh, I mean it's something that at the back of the head we all know. It's that spending time with family is important, and doing what we love is important. But I think we get just too involved in the day-to-day activities and maybe in our careers or everything, that we actually start pushing to the back the things that actually matter the more. So thank you so much for sharing that once again. And okay, so let's talk about your career a bit. Of course, I've mentioned in your intro that you're a writer and you have a blog. One category of blog posts that you have are on settling in Silicon Valley. So do tell us a bit about your writing journey, your key works, and of course some upcoming works that you have. I know you have one very interesting work coming up, so do share about those things.
So the writing journey, like I was talking about earlier, that I just started journaling as a child, and that was just something that I always, it just kind of came naturally to me. But then once the kids were little, I started writing little short stories for them, little kind of children's stories, and just for fun, just to entertain the kids. And that just, when I started doing that again, it just felt like natural. It felt like kind of getting into a warm bath or something, where it just feels like, oh, this is something that I should be doing. So that kind of led me to work on my craft a little bit, and I was starting to work on an historical fiction story when my mom got sick, and then I had my diagnosis, and so that ended up being my first book, was this one. It just happened from what was happening in my life, and that was just something that I needed to do. But since then, I've been working on a nonfiction historical narrative about this team, and it is a women's track team in 1960 in Tennessee, and so this is happening in the middle of the civil rights era in Tennessee, where we had the Jim Crow laws that were segregation, and so it was a Black team from an historically Black university in Nashville, Tennessee. But they, in one year, 1960, they made up almost the entire track team for the Olympics that year for the U.S. track and field team, and they ended up winning lots of gold medals, and they were just an incredible team. And their journey through all of the hardships that they went through, they were able to show this strength and just become elite athletes. So I just felt like it's another story that I feel like is inspiring to people. And, when that was this team was one of the teams that helped to create Title IX, which is a rule in the states where female athletes need to have the same resources available to them as male athletes. So after that rule, now female athletes are allowed to, play soccer and play, and that it's hard for us to think about, when we're dropping our kids off at sports or doing things like that. It used to not be for the girls. It was only for the boys, and it wasn't that long ago. And we kind of forget. And so I think these stories in history, it's important to remember who was the first one that did this. Who was the team that made us change the rules and allowed girls to run and play if they wanted to run and play. So that's what I've been working on now. And also, I'm an editor for I'm an associate nonfiction editor for Pangyrus, which is, I'll just show you the kinds of things that we do. It's a literary magazine in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we put out a couple of books a year. One is they're anthologies of different people's essays and just kind of life topics. It's actually really good. I would recommend to check it out. So those are the two things that I'm working on now. And the plans for the future, I would just say, I just want to keep writing and sharing stories. Hopefully that will help people in some way or another. And also encourage other people to write. That's one of the things I love about my editing work, is to be able to share other people's stories, because everyone has something that they can share to help other people. And so I love to be able to put as many voices out into the world as possible, just to kind of uplift other people's stories as well. So that's my plan.
Interesting. So, good luck for your plans. And Anything else that you'd like to share or talk about, or any message that you'd like to give to the viewers of this video?
So I would just encourage everyone to take really good care of yourselves. Don't take your health for granted. Don't get too busy. Just make sure you take time for yourself. And that's something that I definitely learned to go to those doctor's appointments, go to all the checkups that you need to do, and also just take good care of yourselves. And also just the most important thing that we found was that the love is what matters the most, friendships and family, and to never take that for granted. When you have love in your life, that's what is the most valuable thing.
Uh, it was great talking to you, Amy.
So good to talk to
And
you too.
thank you for taking out the time to share your story. And to everybody watching this video, I'm going to put the link for my review on Amy's And Beneath It All Was Love in the description box, as well as Amazon links for the book. Please do check it out. And also watch Carola Schmidt's interview, which is on cancer in children. It's quite informative. So do take a look at that as well. And if you enjoyed watching this video, if you found it useful and inspirational, please do like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much.